Welcome to the special Libraries NI interview for Book Week NI 2024 with me, Gillian, Stock Manager at Libraries NI, and my colleague Pete. Together we're excited to interview Colm Tóibín, the author of Long Island, which is the title chosen for our big read this week. A multi-award-winning author of numerous novels. His work has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize 3 times. He has won the Costa Novel Prize as well as the Impact Award. And Pete and I from Libraries NI Stock Team are thrilled to have this opportunity to talk to him about Long Island, the unexpected sequel to Brooklyn, which was published 15 years ago. Welcome, Colm.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, as you know, we have chosen Long Island as our big read for Book Week NI this year. So we're just wondering, what took you so long to follow up Brooklyn?
I never planned to follow it up. It really didn't occur to me. I think that a book is an arc rather than a line, where you really need to shape it. You need to give it a rhythm, an internal rhythm almost, the reader is almost unaware of, but is there, that the book is coming to an end, or it's rising and it's going to now slowly descend. And if you say to the reader, well, yeah, here's the end, but actually there's another novel coming that will really explain everything or sum everything up, I think the reader has a right to feel slightly cheated. That, hold on a minute, I want a book. I don't want, I don't want one of a sequence. And So I never planned it until I got the idea for the opening of book Long Island. I mean, the very opening, the very 2.5 first pages, where something happens. It's not merely a continuity of Brooklyn. It is merely 20 years later, and something happens that gives the book a sort of drama, which I would call plot, meaning that something happens, and the consequences of that are the rest of the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to just ask you about that, about the opening of the novel needs to include the hook or the undercurrent that drives the rest of the story. Did it take you long to come up with this, or can you tell us a little bit more about this in Long Island?
I was walking along the street and the first idea came to me that this Irishman would come to her door on Long Island and would almost threaten her. He has to be Irish for a good reason, in that I can't write American dialogue. I would have no idea how an American man under such pressure would sound. I really wouldn't know. But that sort of mixture of that very soft voice of Donegal man in a state of anger, I think I have a sense of that, and I wouldn't get a word wrong. And so really just getting that first section, which is all told from Eilish's perspective. It's told from, she's still on Long Island before she goes back to Ireland. It was much longer at the beginning. I mean, in other words, I was working tentatively. It was during the pandemic, and I had long days, and just thought I'd try this out. So there's a lot more about her job, how she does it every day. The business of working in a garage, trying to source spare parts. I did research on that. But actually, when the book was finished, that first section needed to be much shorter. The rest of the book then depended on on plot, on trying to show the story from 3 different perspectives as it moved on. The issue there was to keep it moving, because if one of the characters, for example, there are 2 other characters, Jim and Nancy, began to ruminate on their own background, on their own past, on their own thoughts, I would lose the book. It had to be very concentrated, that each thought they have, each thing they do is moving the book, is impelling the book. And so I had to concentrate a lot on that.
Okay, and how hard was it to envision Eilish 25 years on? I mean, it must have been quite. You weren't influenced by the actress having played Eilish in the film of Brooklyn, or had you a good idea of how she would have been after 25 years in America?
I think there's a big problem facing anyone writing a novel set in 1976, which is feminism, which is to what extent did what happened in the 60s, did the writings of various feminists, or did just the movement itself affect how she lived and how she deals with the world in this novel? And the answer is, I really do sort of know this from my own background, from my mother and her sisters, to the extent that they would have laughed at women's lib. But it would have not been for them. But at the same time, they were changing in ways they didn't quite understand or ever formulate. And they became, in certain ways, more assertive. But it wasn't just that. They became more articulate. They became more aware of the world. And so I was sort of trying to make her a feminist avant la lettre, or a feminist without ever using the word. That she's and that emerges in the book by her speech, that she becomes more articulate. And that for example, I don't much use I'd or I've. I would, I have, I would. It's just to give her a full articulacy, so that every time she speaks, especially in arguments she has with her brother-in-law, her mother-in-law, her husband, she can sound almost like a lawyer at certain moments, where she's picking up a word, or she's issuing a statement. And but also her big achievement has been her children. It isn't as though she isn't part of an Irish America. She doesn't deal with Ireland at all in America, but she deals with her children. Her realm is domestic space, and she has produced. I mean, again, I have to worry about how to write American Kids of the '70s. What I do is I make the elder one very studious, so she isn't actually part of that movement, and which could happen in a place like Long Island, which would remain very conservative in this period. Anyway, but yeah, it was just a question of building her slowly without giving her any large things like feminism. Just try to make her very sharp.
And that was continued then into Ireland. Whenever she came to Ireland, it was quite obvious to the people there that she was more assertive and that she had changed, probably more so than she would have if she'd been in Ireland.
Yeah, I think also the business of a returned Yank, of the glamour coming back from America. Even at one moment, Jim says to her about some hotel. Oh, well, of course, you would have known the great American hotels. She can't say to him, I've never stayed a night in a hotel. So the question of class, that she hasn't, as it were, made it in America, but she might look like she has, because she's very well dressed, and her hair and her skin. Her sisters-in-law are both Italian women who look at women's magazines in a way that Eilish doesn't. But she's aware very much they're watching every move. If she, dieting and all that business, skin care, all that business is really alive in America in 1976 in a way that it isn't really in Ireland.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you as well, do you have a favourite character in the book? One that you really...
Yeah, I suppose there are two characters.
Yeah, Eilish, but maybe some minor character.
Yeah, the first one, I suppose, is her mother. That her mother is being very hurt, and she's 80 years old, and she's still very fit, but she's really going to manipulate the situation for all she can. She's going to be rude to Eilish, her returned daughter, partly because it's very difficult to write the hug of a returned Yank to the mother who hasn't seen her for 20 years, the cliche of that, of her sighing and saying, it's so great to see you and come in. And I just couldn't write that. So as much as we have her, at the very beginning, she's rude and she's just distant and not helpful, as they say. But once the children come, she changes completely. She becomes polite and really loving. But what she's planning all the time is something that occurs at the end of the book that gives her a sort of triumph at the end of the book. But I better not tell you that, because it'll give the plot away.
It's really like when Eilish turned up, when she left at the end of Brooklyn, everything was in black and white. And when she turns up now, she's in the 70s, she's in full colour, and she's arriving in all these fridges and washing machines turning up, and the mother just can't deal with all this. And they're sitting in the hallway for weeks, gathering dust, and she's threatening to send it all back. Like, that must have been fun to write some of those little bits.
Yeah, I think when you're working, you need all the time to think, is there an object? Instead of saying her mother, wasn't friendly over the first few days, that's not a novel. It's a sentence. Yeah. You need to find a thing. Is there a single thing? And of course, in our house in Enniscorthy, the tumble dryer was a contested space. I don't know if anyone else had this, but everyone else wanted to use the tumble dryer, but my mother said it ate electricity. That thing there eats electricity, and therefore it could only be used at certain special moments. So through the immersion heater, all the business of electricity, electricity was your enemy, because the bill would come, and I'll be the one paying the bill. You'll be off in somewhere. I'll be paying the bill, and so that whole idea, therefore, of that the sort of contest they have, the battle they have, are over these objects that Eilish very foolishly, always with jet lag, orders, thinking her mother would be so delighted they'll come. But her mother isn't that sort of person, and she isn't delighted they've come. And the fridge, she leaves the fridge empty. And So and the idea of a washing machine eating electricity.
Yeah, it's very relatable, actually. I can certainly relate to that from my
Okay.
experience of older women, yes. Was there a certain amount of nostalgia for yourself in writing that? Obviously, you're from Enniscorthy yourself, so you would have had that, and that, as you've mentioned about your mother and everything. So I'm sure it was quite fun, as Pete said, to write that sort of thing.
Yeah, and also the pubs in the town in 1976. All of them pubs are real, except Jim Farrell's pub, which is fictional. But all of the hinterland, the street names, the just the way people dressed, and the idea of you would go to Dublin for a certain sort of rig out
Yeah.
that you mightn't get best at home, but very specially with a lot of advice from people. And I mean, that's women. And that, I mean, the men wouldn't do that. And also the proximity to the coast, the fact you're 10 miles from these beautiful empty beaches. And so I had a few, I mean, there are very few fine summer days, but I have as many of them as possible in this book.
Yeah, there's one of them today, actually. It's a lovely day today.
I was going to ask you, Colm, do you think your characters act differently depending on where the setting is, whether they're in America or in their Ireland? And how does setting influence the characters and their decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Jim Farrell in the book is rooted. He's really, everyone knows him, everyone respects him, everyone likes him. So the idea of then finding such a character, and that's the case where I took a lot from the film, where Donald Gleason's performance showed an Irishman who, I mean, there's so many depictions of Irishmen, North and South, in films and in plays and in novels, who are unstable, unreliable, sometimes drunk, very charming sometimes, with a really dark side, a brooding side. They can be played by Gabriel Byrne. And not that I have anything against Gabriel Byrne, but I'm talking about that sort of Irishman who you could fall in love with, and it would be a big mistake.
Yeah.
And what Donald Gleason played in the film of Brooklyn was an Irishman who was stable, who was decent, who was ordinary, who, there was no dark side and there was no drunken side. There was no really particularly charming side. And so I was interested in what would happen to someone like that if they went under pressure. What would the pressure of love be? What would the pressure of sudden moment of pure disloyalty look like in someone who was absolutely alien to that idea of disloyalty? And so, yeah, I sort of worked with that idea of a certain sort of Irishman that I thought is sort of absent generally from images of Irishmen.
Yeah, I think watching the film again recently, everybody was rooting for his character more so than the Italian.
Yeah, but what you have to worry about is in Ireland, if someone is a man, is completely charming, he's a smiler, he never stops being charming, everyone would watch him to see. This is in my generation, it probably has changed, but I don't think so. Everyone would watch him to see what he's like on a football field, or what he's like with a lot of pints in him.
Yeah.
What change would come? The issue with Tony in Brooklyn is that he's totally charming. And when she watches him and watches him and watches him, because he's an American, she doesn't understand this. She realizes that is not just surface, that he is a charming fellow. And we see with the consequences of that in a way in Long Island, that he's almost too charming, but he doesn't have a dark side. He isn't a brooding figure with 5 glasses of whiskey or anything. He's not like that. And so that surprises her. And but yeah, it's a question of which seemingly when it's done in high schools in America now, which is very surprising. But they do it Team Tony, Team Jim, and in girls' schools it's particularly intense, where some girls like Jim and some girls like Tony. When I was writing it, if I had any idea this was going to happen, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah, the novel deals with a lot of complex family dynamics and obviously a lot of secrets. And many families experience this, but we aren't very good at talking about them openly, which is what you've done in Long Island. How did you approach writing that? Because there's a lot of tension in that, very often unspoken tension.
Yeah, I mean, I think the novel form itself is particularly, and I suppose uniquely suited to the idea of silence and speech, that you can actually show what someone is thinking, and then you can tell what they're saying. And you can see, The distance between is enormous.
two.
And I'm the only person who knows. I'm the reader. So I think in Long Island there are sort of four main characters. There's Ailish, there's Tony, there's Ailish, there's Jim and Nancy, and the reader. Because every time the reader turns the page, the reader knows more than Nancy does. The reader knows more than Ailish does. And sometimes the reader knows more than Jim does. So there's a whole sense of who knows, who doesn't say. And this may seem neurotic, and it may seem particularly Irish in some way, but I don't get that really, because when she goes home to her mother, she doesn't want to tell her mother all about the problem she's having with Tony. Because her mother will never stop talking about it. Her mother will go on and on about it and an awful time you're having in America. So just not telling her seems almost decent, almost right. So therefore, it's not just a neurotic Irish thing about families and silence. It seems to be a sort of good manners almost, just to not to tell her mother this. And that it all depends on a moment when Ailish says to Nancy, is Jim married? Is Jim Farrell married? She's been home, she's been away for 20 years, and she doesn't know. And instead of telling her what's really going on, for some reason of Nancy's, she tells her something completely wrong, thus misleading her, thus letting the whole novel take place. And there are several times where I realized if one character would now tell the other character the truth, this novel ends. Just simply, okay, that's the end, great, okay. Yeah. But because they don't do this, and each of them have a reason. For example, there's a secret engagement. I think it'll be the last novel in which a secret engagement will be possible. But it's 1976, and the daughter announces her engagement by surprise on New Year's Eve, and the mother, of course, cannot suddenly cut in to say, I'm engaged too. It just wouldn't be right. The daughter would have to say to her, could you just leave me my happiness for a month? Could you just... So they decide to keep their engagement secret. Now, everything depends on this. If you don't have that, therefore, if the engagement is public, then there's no novel. But I had to really work at making it plausible that the mother really would think, and Jim would think, let Miriam have her happiness. Don't say the whole town is talking about her. Your mother's engaged as well as you. So that's another trying to make plausible the whole idea of secrecy.
Yeah, like there's so much internal dialogue going on in this book, with Jim and Ailish and everybody. Like, is it difficult to write that? What's the process for writing dialogue? Is there a less is more approach?
The first thing is no regional flavor. There's no Irish sound necessarily to her talking, and there's no American, even when the mother-in-law talks, just trying not to make her like an Italian. They're not giving her a sort of sound. So I think that's the first thing. Irish dialogue is particularly worrying sometimes to watch a writer deciding to go a sort of Bigara road.
Yeah.
On Irish dialogue. It doesn't talk like that. And I suppose what I really was working on, sometimes when you're doing a big scene with two characters talking, you have to do it in real time, meaning I write in longhand. You have to write it as though it's happening now and as though you never get another chance to describe it, because you're almost transcribing from your imagination, of course, but nonetheless, it's not as though you're trying out something and going slow. You go fast and you go as, what would the next person say? Okay, come in there, quick, so it's you therefore afterwards you can go back, shorten it, add something, but the general text is written in a first draft. And as you're working in a first draft, you think, I'll never get another chance to do this. The next draft will be slacker, if anything. I need to get this down now and right. And it isn't a question even of working on your ear or saying things out loud. Just see, what would she say next? And it might be as simple as, I don't know, what do you think? Or if you could listen to me, I would, for one moment, if you would listen to me. That you can use those sort of things, but she does have to, it has to be dramatic. It has to be leading somewhere. It has not merely to be a sort of an account of grievance as much as trying to get the argument moved on into another space. So there's a moment with the mother-in-law where she realizes that she knows more than the mother-in-law thinks she knows. And she watches the mother-in-law telling her lies. And she just thinks, right, watch, listen to you. And she's not going to confront her. She's going to let her tell lies, let her do her worst, and just think worst of her, think badly of her. So you're getting out of that dialogue. In fact, Ailish has sort of given up on her mother-in-law.
Yeah, I was listening to the audiobook first, and I don't know whether you've heard it. Jessie Buckley, the actress,
Yeah,
she did a fantastic job. She had all the accents down, and everyone brilliantly.
Yeah, you don't. It's great in those with the mother-in-law where you don't have a problem for a single moment with Jessie, between who's talking, because she's actually got the accents, as you say, right, and she's got the
Yeah,
sort of
even the Italian mother, she did that sort of drawl.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Well, obviously we don't want to give away any spoilers, but I just wanted to ask you, between Brooklyn and Long Island, I mean, both of them have ambiguous endings, should I say? We're not quite sure what's happening next. Are you inviting a discussion on what happens next, or and is there any chance that you will revisit the story again?
It didn't occur to me, and I know that readers are having difficulty with the ending, that it looks as though it isn't all tied up. And I suppose the argument about endings of novels began in the 1870s when George Eliot produced Middlemarch. And at the very end of Middlemarch, this long panoramic novel, she gives you an account of what happened to each of the characters over the next 20, 30 years, each of them. So, by the end of the novel, everything that happened. That did Ladislaw go into Parliament? Yes, he did. Did Dorothy? Each one of them. Henry James, a few years later, was having an enormous sort of artistic dialogue with George Eliot. At the end of Portrait of a Lady, you presume she's going to run off with Caspar Goodwood at the end of the book. And there's a moment where Caspar Goodwood comes to the house in London, knocks on the door, and her friend Henrietta says, where's Isabel? She has gone back to her husband. And you go, oh, wow. And you turn the page and there's nothing. That is the end. There are 3 more lines or something, but there's no next chapter saying what in the name of God happened when she went back to her husband. And so in that argument between George Eliot and Henry James, I seem to be on the Henry James side. And in other words, that the ending leaves you feeling, the ending with Jim is that he is left insecure, unsure, disturbed, uncertain, and there's nothing can be done about that. I mean, I can't tie that up or give him certainty, give him security. It can't be done. He's left at the end of the novel in a hallway, just wondering what hit him. And there you go.
And will you consider another one, or
consider is a funny word. I mean, these things come to me. Sometimes come to you in a flash. Other times something comes to you and it's so wrong that you wonder, how did I entertain that for a month? How did I let that in my head? So I wouldn't start writing until I'm sure, but often the most terrible ideas come, not just in the morning, but at night. And sometimes the morning is the best way of getting rid of them, but sometimes the morning doesn't work. And you have an awful idea for a month. And John McGahern used to say that he hoped and prayed, indeed, that he wouldn't have another idea until after Christmas.
Just stop thinking. Just stop thinking.
You'd have to start. Oh my God! You'd have to get your pen out and start working, and every day would be ruined. But at the moment, I'm doing nothing, and I haven't a thought in my head.
Well, you never know. Maybe in another 10 years, we're walking down another street, and you'll see someone who just click. So you're probably fed up talking about all this, but do you want to, or can you tell us about anything that's coming up in the future? Any future projects?
Yeah, but honestly, I promise you, the best fun you can have is to write an opera. And a few years ago, Rosetta Cucci, who's the director of the Wexford Opera Festival, I couldn't. She asked to see me, and I thought she wanted me to write something, some program note or something. She said, "Would you write a libretto?" And I had written one already, and yeah, I really wanted to do that, but I didn't want to be too enthusiastic. I'd look like a fool or something. But I left her office, agreeing to write an opera, which is now going to be performed. It's going to open at the festival on the 20th of October. It's in rehearsal. It began rehearsal this week, and so that's a libretto for an opera. And it should be. You see, you don't have to do any psychological realism or worry about objects, or if you just want someone to do something, you just have them sing. And you have duets instead of dialogue. Instead of dialogue, you've tried doing clunky dialogue for a libretto. You just have to have someone sing and someone join in. And anyway, it's tremendous. It's about Lady Gregory, who took the Abbey Theatre to America in 1911. They all got arrested in Philadelphia. It's a comedy. So for once, actually, at the very end, everyone marries everyone. It is completely symmetrical. It is marriage after marriage after marriage after marriage. And it is all good fun. And it is, even to get arrested, they're soon released. They fall out of love, they fall back in love. even the people who seem the most unpleasant and there are two end up marrying each other. So that then solves that problem. And anyway, yeah, it sure beats work.
It sounds very interesting. So tell me this, if you hadn't been a writer, what would you have been? I know you were a journalist for a long time, but I know you were a bad barman as well at one stage.
Bad barman, bad poet, journalist. No, I was okay as a journalist, but I often would think that I'd love to have been involved in. I know this sounds really dull, but in curriculum development, in the changing of the, which hasn't really happened in the South, the sort of changing of the education system so that you would be able to have less pressure on kids over the leaving cert, over results, over, doing one single exam. I think a huge changes have been made. I think it's happened. I think in both in the two islands where the curriculum in English has really changed and has become exciting. Maybe some effort to get books that the kids won't like off the curriculum onto books that might excite them, interest them, and inspire them. And I think that's happened in both places. I'd love to have been involved in that. Just those things. I'd love to be involved in the changing of history curriculum, which I think has also happened, but I'd love to have just been in the room for that. So yeah, I'd like to have been a bit of a little reformer in the matter of education, but it was too late now. So I have to. But some of it has been done, and some is left to be done. But it's a most interesting project.
Okay, well, Colm, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciated this, and our readers will love to listen to this, I'm sure, as well. So all the best for the future.
Thank you very much.
And thank you again.
Okay, take care.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, head over to our YouTube channel for more, where you can subscribe, like and share. And be sure to follow our channel on Podbean to catch our podcasts there too. Of course, don't forget to visit your local library and explore our website librariesni.org.uk to discover the books that we've been talking about. Happy reading.